Hi, welcome to this special edition of the DECAMERON Project. I'm Dan McCleary of Tennessee's Shakespeare Company, and today is Monday, January 11th, 2021. Our Aristotelian theme today is justice, and this is chosen, as you may recall, from among his 12 stated virtues of humankind. And like all the DECAMERON projects, we'll wing this. Um, we'll start with the anniversary, though, today, and then we'll see if we can't wind up with William Shakespeare's play that centers itself around the Magna Carta. But, it never gets mentioned in the play, and I wonder why. Okay, today is the birthday of Alexander Hamilton. We found out only after his death that his birth year was, in fact, 1757. He claimed that there was 2 years difference, but maybe this wasn't, intentionally misleading. Mr. Hamilton was an orphan, and he was born on the island of Nevis in the Caribbean to unwed parents. So that he survived is remarkable enough. But as you know, he did more. He represented New York in our country's constitutional convention. He joined John Jay and James Madison in writing the Federalist Papers. And of course, without these essays, we might not have our current Constitution. And then he became our first Secretary of State. Now, you may also know that Mr. Hamilton because of his famous duel that he had with the 1800 presidential opponent of Thomas Jefferson. Now, Mr. Hamilton and Jefferson were hardly on the same side of the political or financial spectrum. But Mr. Hamilton knew that the opponent, Aaron Burr, was a psychopathic fool. And he was far more compelled, this Burr, by the promise of financial self-dealing than democratic preservation, shall we say. But Burr packed a pistol, and he was a good shot, and he killed Mr. Hamilton. But now consider the people who Mr. Hamilton served with in Philadelphia as they were transitioning from our Articles of Confederation to our U.S. Constitution and then into the Bill of Rights. In addition to Jay and Jefferson and Madison, there were Sam and John Adams, there was John Hancock, Ben Franklin, James Madison, Patrick Henry, there was George Washington, and they were creating this living document that could remain flexible long after they were gone. So they were birthing this democratic republic. But they had a lot of help, and they had a lot of guidance. It was just up to them as to what they chose. So who did they turn to? Well, the United States is probably the most litigious country in the world right now. So was it a lawyer? No, they were not turning to a lawyer. They were turning to poet-philosophers. And were they creating a document that we all had to sign with pink and feather or quill? No, they were creating something that we tend to forget now. America's social contract, a social contract. They were reflecting on humanity's moral authority. The great thinkers of the Age of Enlightenment considered this social contract to be the legitimacy of an authority of the state, those people who we elect over its individuals, over its people. And in this transaction, the people, we need to surrender some freedoms in exchange for protection of our remaining rights and of social order. And specifically, what we need to give over, what we gain, what we seek protection for, and these will sound familiar to you, are life and our liberty and our property. And there was Jacques Rousseau, who introduced the term of the social contract just a decade before the First Continental Congress convened. But the thought of the social contract has its roots in, as all great things do, in ancient Greece. But the thought goes through someone else who you've heard of and probably know, Thomas Hobbes. And you know, Hobbes he was about 18 years old when Shakespeare was writing Macbeth. Uh, and Hobbes considers our state of nature with a capital N. And so he's considering our natural rights. You know, what rights are we born to? Do we not have to bargain for? And Hobbes claimed that we humans would act as brutes absent political order, and that we would exercise the right to rape and murder and destroy and desecrate in our natural state. So here's Hamilton and the others, and the framers of our Constitution adopted this philosophy, and they agreed that we must socially contract with one another and with our government leaders. I should also point out that John Locke and Rousseau also argued that we actually gain civil rights by abdicating some of our freedoms, and that also we gain as we defend the rights of others, which is a point I love. I mentioned earlier the Bill of Rights, which of course are the first 10 amendments to the Constitution, which happened shortly after the ratification. Now, the first of these establishes, of course, our freedom of speech. And this is a terrific example of how we balance our freedoms, our American freedoms, with their abdication. We give up something to get everything that's left protected. The First Amendment begins, Congress shall make no law, which right away draws out a really fine point with regard to criteria, doesn't it? Our right to free speech, it's been litigated countless times. We have scores of laws defining this freedom. So, you know, we're not free to say whatever we want to say. We're not free to yell fire in a crowded theater when there's no fire. We're not permitted to use speech to support murder and fraud and slander, libel, the exploitation of children. And when we do support these lack of freedoms, we not only cause physical harm, as we know, we actually turn our democracy traitorously upon itself. I don't have this memorized, but here's a bit from John Locke. All men by nature are equal in that equal right that every man hath to his natural freedom without being subjected to the will or authority of any other man. Being all equal and independent, no one ought to harm another in his life, in his health, in his liberty, or his possessions. It's John Locke. I'll go off to the Magna Carta now. This is 1215, you know, the Great Contract. And this was another cornerstone of Mr. Hamilton's and the framers' thinking. And it connected the Greeks to the great thinkers and poets of the Enlightenment. It limited, the Magna Carta, in short, it limited the king's powers, and it restored feudal rights, and it restated English law. And Shakespeare wrote about the Great Contract, but he never mentioned it by name. And the play that this centers around it is titled King John. It's a terrific play. And both King John, the real man, King John, and Shakespeare's monarch, Queen Elizabeth I, you know, were excommunicated by the Roman Catholic Church. So Elizabeth was to be the divine ruler. There was not to be a contract here. You know, so Shakespeare, that's probably the reason he didn't wish to mention it, lest there be insurrection from the stage. But you see, here's King John, and he was a weak ruler, and he was a terrible military strategist, and he was forced to sign the Magna Carta, but it didn't last very long, did it? His country fell into civil war shortly thereafter. But at the end of the play, King John, which I hope we get to do for you, there is a character named the Bastard in the play. His name is Philip. It's Philip the Bastard. The last words of the play are, "This England never did, nor never shall, lie at the proud foot of a conqueror, but when it first did help to wound itself. Now these her princes are come home again, come the three corners of the world in arms, and we shall shock them. Naught shall make us rue if England to itself do rest but true." In other words, we've met our worst enemy, and it is we the people. As we're reminded by Mr. Hamilton, whose birthday we celebrate today, and Plato, and Socrates, and Epicurus, and Locke, and Hobbes, and Rousseau, and our namesake, William Shakespeare, ours, yours and mine, is a natural law that must be redeemed not by a notarized written contract, but by mutual consent, a social contract that is transcendent. And you know what? Either we honor one another's humanity in our social contract, or we let fall the United States. Thank you.